Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes. We have a lot of people joining. I'm very excited to say hello, everybody. I'm Ellen Nettles. And we have Christine Lafuente here with her beautiful paintings behind us. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. Really, really appreciate it. We'll just wait like a minute or two to let some people come in. I'm just waiting 1 minute. I'm sorry for the delay. All right. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Ellen Nettles from Art Now Media. Oops, I have some more people. I'm just gonna welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you coming to this evening's talk with Christine Lafuente. As I mentioned, I'm Ellen Nettles from Art Now Media. And tonight I am pleased to host a talk with gallery artist Christine Lafuente on her most recent exhibition of paintings at Art Now Media, Eye Candy, as well as her work with flowers, landscapes, and yes, spring, because I have to mention that because it's so beautiful today. I will say that despite having to reschedule this talk, the stars are even more aligned because this evening there'll be a full pink moon. And I have to say that I think that is completely appropriate. So tonight's agenda is as follows. I'll introduce Christine. She'll provide a brief overview of the work. She will not, and I will have a conversation about it. And then we will leave time for your questions through the chat function on Zoom. Please feel free to put them at any time. I will make a notification where that is. So I just wanted to briefly introduce the artist. I'm just going to admit another person. Christine Lafuente's most recent exhibit, Eye Candy, features some new innovative color saturated and sweet painting. The artist so aptly states, painting from nature is a poetic act that allows me to combine both the sweetness of color and the creamy lusciousness of oil. Christine's paintings are just so beautiful and so full, and I just love them personally, so it is really my pleasure to present them. The work features a mix of innovative color-saturated yet sweet paintings. Wonderful color, impasto paint, and creative compositions abound. From the warm pinks of cherry blossoms to the fun trompe-l'oeil of zinnias, pears, and pitcher, Lafuente sculpts and manipulates each painting to great effect. To quote briefly from her bio, a native of Poughkeepsie, New York, yay, Christine received an AB in English from Bryn Mawr College in 1991. She then moved to downtown Philadelphia to earn a certificate in painting and printmaking from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. There she was awarded a Louis S. Ware Memorial Scholarship for European travel, while art in residence at the Fleisher Memorial from 1997 to 2002. She began teaching and studied at the Barnes Foundation. In 2000, she moved to Brooklyn, New York, where she earned a master's in fine arts at Brooklyn College. Christine currently lives and works in Brooklyn throughout the year and spends summers painting in Maine, which is such an amazing combination. So before we get started, everyone should stay muted for this call. Please ask questions in the chat function below. I read everybody's courtesy and cooperation. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce the artist, Christine Lafuente. Christine, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Lafuente, and I'm seeing, my friends. I'm seeing all my painter friends and students and colleagues and collectors, and then people that I have yet to meet in person. So thank you so much for taking the time to come. It's an honor. I've been working with Ellen for a number of years and I have been very excited to take on our new digital first gallery. I'm learning so much, and I'm just excited to be part of the experience. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about some paintings. And so here we go. So I'm going to start by talking about peonies because it's almost peony season. Peony season. I grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, and in the house I grew up, there was a backyard with various different fruit trees, flower trees, a garden, and in the very back of the property were these peonies that would bloom once a year. And they were flowers that my mom loved. And I learned from her that if you bring peonies in from the garden, that chances are they'll be covered in ants because of the sweetness of the peonies. So, you know, I have this childhood memory of what a peony is. And I started painting still life when I was at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, which is a figurative training program, very much in the French Academy tradition. And so what I discovered over time was that flowers were a much easier model to hire than a nude. But I like to arrange them in the way that I might arrange a nude. And so I often think of a still life as like this little stage. And I'm gonna mute you, Ellen, while I speak. Oh, you got it. Okay, all right, no problem. So I often think of the still life as a like a proscenium, and this is out. I painted this painting. This is a 12 by 16 painting. It's called Peonies and Bowls, and I painted this out in New Jersey at a dear painter friend's house who has like peony blooms every year. So in early June, there are peonies there and daisies. There's daisies in here. And this one shelf, it was like this shadow box. And I like to arrange the flowers and the objects so that like the light masses, the areas of light kind of connect in a gestural way that evokes a figure. And the peonies themselves are like faces to me. They're like, and sometimes the grouping of them are like faces. So I kind of think of this like, kind of like an Olympia in a way, right? She's just kind of like, you know, she's like posing on this ledge, right? She's on, you know, she's front stage center. So this is, I think I did this in 2014. And the thing about the peony season is it's brief. And so what I like to do as best as possible is to not schedule anything between Memorial Day and mid-June, because at the very least, there are going to be things blooming then. And sometimes earlier I can get them in New York. So, but you know, this is about 4 or 5 years later. This is 2019. And what happened over that time is I was painting a lot of fog and water paintings up in Maine. And so when I come back to the studio in Brooklyn, I find that I'm still thinking about the fogs in Maine, and I'm thinking about the reflections of, say, boats or rocks or clouds, or, you know, things that are in the sky that get reflected in the water. And it ends up kind of creating this like a weaving between like that the light that's hitting the side of things create this, you know, range of verticals, and the reflections are being vertically cast below. So there's kind of light that's coming down. And this is in my studio, which is an unobstructed north light studio. So everything's being lit from the side, but being caught and then coming down. And then the shadows are coming to the side. So it ends up feeling like this weaving of light coming in one way and shadow going in another way. And then in the center, I set this up and it almost to me feels like a portrait, like this is a head in a way, containing everything into this kind of knot of forms of light and color. So this is kind of where I was at in 2019. And then in 2020, everything changed for so many of us. And for me in 2020, I had to shelter in place in Puerto Rico, which meant that from early March of 2020 until mid-July of 2020, I was in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico, which was an incredible experience. Also, crazy in the way that we all had those experiences during COVID. But I missed peony season. I missed it. And I missed daffodil season, cherry season, pansy season. I missed all the seasons that I'd become accustomed to. Of course, I got to experience bougainvillea, frangipani. There were things down there that I wasn't as, there are things down there that I didn't know. But one thing I experienced in Old San Juan was so much color in the skies, so much color in the buildings, and the buildings themselves, this colonial Spanish architecture. There are all these kind of candy colored buildings, and that's kind of what inspired me for the title of this show. This kind of tropical candy color that I would see looking down into the street from my balcony while we were in curfew. And then up in the sky, there were rainbows and these amazing roiling clouds. And so when I came back, my color just kind of opened up. And so these are peonies from 2022. And these are very open peonies, but I really wanted to get the effect of kind of a riot of color moving across the forms. And so this is like a different kind of feeling. It's a kind of like an opening up. And I also started to place my still life in front of I put a set of shelves back there with still life objects, which to me feels like kind of like a city, like it feels a little bit like a metropolis of these like layers of forms. So to have this, kind of backdrop, like buildings where you're looking into windows. So it kind of brings this, I don't know, like a city feeling into the still life arrangement. So this is just like how I return to the same subject year after year, season after season, a subject that I was introduced to well before I ever started painting, as a child. But there's something about painting this kind of brief, beautiful flower. It's not like a rose that you can get at any time of year. It's so brief that it feels like you're kind of seizing the day. You're kind of stopping in time to pay attention to something beautiful. And I always paint from life when I'm painting still life, and I always paint by natural light because I need to have the experience of the light being alive and there being life in the forms. With landscape, I've learned how to kind of transpose atmospheres into memory, but with still life, I find that I want to have a direct relationship, a direct perceptual relationship. So I'm going to go on to a different flower now, the ranunculus. It has another, buttercup. I think they're also called buttercups, which is a more poetic name, but I love the ranunculus. It's like it's like it has these beautiful heads with kind of floppy necks, and they change colors from inside to out. They to me, they kind of feel like pastries, the way they open up. And this is very much a still life inspired by the atmospheres in Maine, with the fogs and the reflections in the water. And so this is a 12 by 16 inch painting. There are two bottles here, and they also kind of feel like figures to me. Like, I don't know, sometimes I think of my bottles like nuns or something. So these are the ranunculus. This was probably 2017. And then I have another ranunculus painting. This is from 2019, a couple years later. And this painting really, I just wanted to get like the light, like a dappled light feeling across the entire form. And behind it, I have a violin. This is my mom's violin. So there's kind of a feeling about my mom in this painting, a feeling of music in the painting. And the light kind of, to me, is like these musical notes across the whole figure, and the whole figure meaning the painting. So this is 16 by 20, and I have this painting behind me, and it's framed in a white gold floater frame, beautiful frame. And you know, the faceted light, you know, I was very interested in the kind of faceted light. And this is a jar of linseed oil, which is really about my craft and many of yours also. So the oil is, it's sort of fun to like put the objects of the craft in the painting itself. And then cherry blossoms. I mean, cherry blossoms are, to me, very difficult to paint because they, you know, they're like these beautiful little flowers that have a form, but the form, it expands like almost instantly and turns into this pink snow almost instantly. And so, you know, the petals are so tiny that it, you know, to me, it feels like it sort of, it's like comes and goes in a way. I don't know how else. It's a dappled kind of pink light. And then you know, some of these objects, the objects themselves all have like an emotional resonance. And that's something that's like private, right? You know, we have like our favorite cup or our favorite thing that we like to look at. But the blue bottle is to me a way of putting a sky in a painting, because, you know, the blue glass kind of feels like, you know, when you paint your ceiling blue, the haint blue on the, like a porch ceiling or something, it's a way to bring sky into a painting that otherwise doesn't have sky. So, and this is this is like, it's a spice jar that has yellow ochre paint in it that was, it's yellow ochre pigment that belonged to my late teacher, Seymour Remnick. He was my teacher at the Pennsylvania Academy. And so I inherited some of his studio props, and they, you know, sometimes I'll bring them into a painting, and it's a way for me to think about Seymour. So I wanted to just share that also. And this is a recent painting. It's called Cherry Blossoms, and it's 12 by 12 inches. Again, this is, you know, influenced by Old San Juan, you know, these tropical colors. And then I want to talk a little bit about painting up in Maine. I started painting up in Maine in 2009, and mostly when I'm up there, I just want to sit and look out at the sea, or sit and look at, or stand for the painters here. No, I'm standing, really. But I want to look out into the distance. I find that I want to look through the trees into the distance, because the mists up there, the mists and the fogs create these light and color effects that I don't see here. And I don't see them anywhere else. And in fact, my experience painting in Puerto Rico was so completely different than painting in Maine. And in Puerto Rico, I experienced these incredible skies, but it was also the sun was so intense that I would have to kind of wedge myself into shade somehow to paint toward the end of the day. Whereas up in Maine, you can paint all day in the middle of the day. So I started painting still life outdoors, which is very challenging because the sun moves, but I wanted to start to incorporate the sunshine and the sunbeams and the distant landscape. So this is 16 by 16 inches. It's called Wildflowers and Peaches. There are these beautiful cosmos that bloom up there that I don't see down here. I know they're down here, but they're so abundant up there. It's just a whole different kind of personality of wildflowers up there. And then the last image I wanted to show is a recent painting. And to me, this painting feels also like music. This is called Delphinium and Cosmos. And in a way, like the cosmos become like little faces too. So it kind of has a populated feeling, like a group of figures that are like, all like together and looking out. But this is on a porch with green spruce trees behind, and the sun. When I'm painting outdoors under this covered porch, what I will do is mix color, and then hopefully when I've mixed and kind of looked and mixed and looked, then I kind of look up and see where the sun is, because the sun moves so fast up there that this is kind of like an athletic sport to try to grab that experience in this very brief period of time, which is very different from painting in my studio, where I can set something up and I can set something up at 10 in the morning, go eat lunch, take a nap, drink a cup of coffee, and it still kind of looks the same. Whereas up in Maine, everything changes so fast. So it's more of a challenge. But it was really fun to bring all the color into this, the delphinium, these lavenders and blues of the delphinium. It's just, it just adds kind of another kind of prismatic richness. So in a way,
I just wanted to ask one question. It's interesting in this painting how there are sort of these color blocks behind that aren't so evident in some of your other paintings. Would you say that that is something that has to do with this particular painting or composition? Because you notice the greens and the blues, and it really makes the flowers come to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a different technique than ones you've employed in the past.
Well, painting, so I've set this up on a porch, right? And these are on the right. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but on the right is these painted, I know there's a formal name for it, like the post on a porch.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like the banister thing. It has a name. I don't remember what it's called. And then behind is this kind of distant atmosphere of spruce trees. So and one thing that I play with in all my paintings is kind of going back from kind of neutralized color into saturated color. And so very often I'll kind of frame this saturated movement, which can be gestural or just a way to guide the eye into a focal point, but surrounded by large expanses of grayed or brown down color. So so atmospheric perspective, naturally cools and grays down color in the distance. So I kind of play with that here and in the last painting as well. I'll just bring that back too.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like abstracting the landscape around these forms. So
Yeah.
it is a little more like, big brush, broad stroke, and it's kind of framing the bits of color in it.
I would say the movement of the way you captured the white tablecloth and the differentiation in color feels very similar to the next painting in terms of the greens, the treatment. I see the treatment as being very similar, which is really interesting because they're capturing different things, but I think they serve the same purpose. And I've noticed this in some of your paintings, and then in others, there's much more of this idea of the landscape and capturing these objects in the landscape with things behind them. So I think there is sort of this interesting juxtaposition. And in some of the more abstracted forms, this technique makes the eye move around a great deal.
Thank you. Should I scroll back to something that you might want
Yes.
a question about?
I just thought if you wanted to go back to the one with the violin for 1 second. So here you see, and we discussed this a little bit, the forms feel not quite much more rendered, but the overall effect feels more exact.
Yes.
The way the bottle is created, the way the violin is suggested. I think the case of the violin really creates that sense of space, especially because the top is open. You almost have 4 planes going on, the front, the front of the image, you have the reflection of the flowers, or the lower pink, then you have the flower, then you have the bottle, then you have the case, then you have the violin, then you have the top of the violin case, and then you have the wall or whatever is behind.
This painting is built very much like a landscape. And
Yes.
it's very much like a classical landscape. And a couple of the people in this class were in the last class I taught, and in that class we were looking at classical landscapes and transposing them into still life arrangements. So some of the kind of devices that are in this painting are, this foreground, kind of the lip here, and then this is like a little tea towel, but it comes.
It's a tea towel. Okay.
Tea towel, yeah. So it kind of comes up diagonally like a road, right? So it's a road that starts to zigzag, across space, and then these flowers being in front of this large form, the flowers and the bottle really are framing devices for the violin.
Yeah.
Right? So the violin is framed by the eye kind of, we come in like it's a road, and then there is the violin that's being framed by these 2 forms, the vase of the flowers, which is to me very figurative, like you could say it's like in the spirit of the season, like Mother Mary looking down on Jesus, or mother and child, a lover looking at a beloved. So the flowers kind of are bending down. There's also eucalyptus in there, which is catching the light. But then the violin, which is this horizontal form, and then the violin case, which is kind of like a mountain in the distance.
Can I also say that it's not just compositionally or visually, I feel like this is almost a virtual hug of your mother, the way you've composed it, because
Yeah.
you have two elements about you, and
Mhm.
then your mother, the violin is in is in the center, which I think is so lovely.
Yeah, yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I have other paintings that have, they're not in this slideshow, but there is one of the paintings that's on eye candy is a peony painting that has red thread in it. And the red thread is, my mom is a seamstress, so sometimes I'll paint things that are her craft, right? So I'll just mention that also.
Which is that, and that is a really lovely painting. I encourage you to go to
And
eye
it is,
candy.
and it is on the wall here. It's on the wall.
All
So,
right.
okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I feel but I felt like it was important to say that. Did you have you finished with your remark? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think I would kind of go down a little list of questions that I
Okay.
have, and I'm always curious about for your work.
Okay. And if you want me to go to a different image, let me know.
Okay. Well, can you briefly speak about why you started painting still lifes in the first place?
Sure, sure. And maybe I'll just go back to a different painting for a second.
Sure.
So yeah, let's go to this one. I love this painting. This is this is 14 by 14, and this is peonies and blue bottles. So again, I was at the Pennsylvania Academy and I was trained as a figurative painter. And still life was kind of part of the discipline of the classwork there. But when I was at school, I found it actually very difficult to sit in a room by myself. And that took me, it took me some years of kind of getting comfortable with myself being able to work. And once I started working in a room by myself, and I know this, it's just, this is a way to answer the question. Like a world opened up when I got comfortable being in, being in my own space. And also when I started kind of my own painting practice in Philadelphia, I was down the hall from a friend who had a garden, and he always would, we had a shared refrigerator, and in our refrigerator, he would have his bouquets, and then sometimes he would have these buckets of, rose clippings or, various things he was clipping. And so he always gave me things. And so it was a very kind of a gift from another painter. And I would start to put them into, I'd put them on the table and then start to surround them with other forms. And so I think a combination of the figurative training, wanting to paint from life, wanting to paint from nature, but also the years that I spent as a child doing theater, it's really fun to be like, I'm the director and the stage manager, and I get to create this scene. Now when I'm painting landscape, it's a whole other thing, because when I'm out in the landscape, I'm kind of like at the mercy of the gods. But when I'm in the still life, when I'm in the studio, I can be the master puppeteer. Which is a very intimidating responsibility. Some days I go in the studio and spend hours rearranging things, and then I realize I'm hungry and the sun's going down and I go home. But there's something about the process of looking and playing with the interaction of light on forms. So anyway, I don't know if that's answered it.
No, that's helpful. I mean, that kind of goes into my next question. Why do you keep painting still lifes, and what do you think there is about their format that makes them so highly successful to you personally, because I think you really come into your own when you're doing these paintings.
It's
And
and it's the intimacy. That's the intimacy.
yeah,
It's a way that I know myself, and returning to a subject that I return to again and again. It's like visiting a friend, seeing a friend in a regular way, like, oh, hi, let's, we got to catch up. And then we know ourselves in that. So it really does, when I'm in the studio with, and the important thing is having a studio, obviously, but a place, my own workspace that can be a mess, but I can also make it beautiful. Then it's when I'm there, it allows me to kind of separate from all the difficulties of life and just connect visually with something, to me, that it is so beautiful. That, I mean, I find flowers in the north light or in the sunlight to be exquisite. And so I want to look at them, and translating into paint feels like it feels like kind of awkward, and you're like, we're gonna fail, we know we're gonna fail, but it's a way to honor the act of seeing. And so I find that I want to be seeing. I want to try to see the things that I love in a new way every time I come back to them.
okay. So this kind of segues into the next question I had, and you kind of alluded to this a bit, especially in the last painting you showed. Your flowers have very distinct and individual personalities, I find. Do you think of them as part of the composition as personifications? Because I do think that they have their own character. It's almost like it's a play. You mentioned, you liked being a stage manager. I think these paintings, a lot of the reason that they're so fun, besides the beautiful color and the paint and the composition, is that very often you think sometimes these flowers are going to talk to you and say something to you.
Oh, that's lovely. And I, again, I think the answer is yes, of course. They do have personality. I once tried to paint magnolia, and magnolia, they don't hold still. Like, I put this blossom,
Yes.
it didn't hold still. The things were moving while I was painting them. They were opening, they were moving. Tulips also, they don't hold their form. So they're a little bit like
kind of like the ADHD kids of the.
or they're like animals. They're like animals, right? Like we want a still life because we want to be able to look up and it's still there, but it isn't always. So it is true. Let me go back to the ranunculus, because oh no, that's forward. I don't know. I mean, the ranunculus is such a delicate flower, and I find it hints at itself. It's like, I look at it and there are so many petals. I mean, roses similarly, there's so many petals that I think there's a Rilke poem about roses being like an eye with many lids, right? That these are, I find these less obvious to paint. Some, although any flower that I try to paint ends up feeling challenging.
Well, you even mentioned during your talk, you were talking about how they had floppy necks.
Floppy necks, yeah.
So it's not like stems,
Right, right.
But, you know, I do think that they do feel like their heads feel a little heavy and they're kind of moving, you know, resting and moving down as through their life cycle. You know, all these flowers have different life cycles. So you mentioned the magnolia, you know, being constant motion.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, you have the peony, which tends to start dropping its
Yes, here, I'll come back to this one. Yes, yes.
you know, so they have a different way of dealing with their own interior evolution, which I think is so interesting because when you look, you know, you look at these paintings and you look at the flowers, it's the personification of them, obviously, and the idea behind them that makes the painting so interesting. Because if you've seen a peony and you look at these, you know, these peonies in the painted canvas, you know, you're getting the personification, the idea behind them, and they're, you know, they're a little bit abstracted because I think you're putting your own mark on them and your own opinion about them.
This painting I'll mention also, there's kind of a formal play on this painting because there are all these bowls that are in, you know, they're stacked bowls, and the peony is also kind of like stacked bowls. So there's sort of a fun play between the natural and the handmade or architectural.
Okay, so you mentioned your trips to Maine.
Okay.
And I do think that they absolutely rejuvenate you. Just like when you were in Puerto Rico, there was a distinct influence of your work when you came back. I really felt it and could see it. But I wanted to ask, can you briefly discuss how your annual trips to Maine rejuvenate your aesthetic process? Because I think they do.
Yeah, they do. Well, and there are some Maine painters on here also. Well, I would say the first thing is usually by the time I get there, I've been painting alone in a room for, you know, from September till June. So I'm a little nuts, right? And then I get there, you know, I've just been like in my head, right? I'm in my head and by myself, and then I go and I paint with other painters, and I'm in this you know, kind of, you know, there's a the rusticators, you know, we all, you know, we show up there and we want to paint together. And so I'm with people painting, and it helps me get out of my head and into the landscape. And I also get inspired by the work other people do.
Yeah.
And also, you know, we're feeding each other and listening to each other's life issues. And, you know, so there's something that kind of helps to keep the work going. So that's kind of like an emotional thing. But the other thing about painting in Maine is that I find, and I'm just going to go forward to this painting, like I was with a friend and we were both painting the still life together, and I can't tell you how many times we moved the table, we moved the objects, the sun moved, we went behind the clouds. By the time we started painting, we didn't know if we were going to actually be able to paint. But whenever I paint up there, it's like I'm trying to paint something I don't even know what it looks like. And the challenge of trying to paint something that I don't visually understand, it kind of brings up my chops, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think that kind of leads into the idea of, you know, how does this affect your work the rest of the year? Besides rejuvenation, emotionally, making artists need to be around other artists, making that sort of emotional and creating that sort of influential thing. I do think that when you come back from Maine and you're rejuvenated, I just like to hear, have there been different things that have happened or different times when it's affected you differently? Because I know it does affect you every year.
Yeah, it does affect me. And I find that one thing I've been able to do over time is paint from like a motif, right? In a small format, right? Like, 10 by 10, 12 by 12, like many times, to do a series from the same motif, say, 5 to 8 times. And then, there might be a subject that I go back to every summer, this certain pile of rocks in the afternoon, for example, or even like, painting flowers on the porch, right?
Right.
Go back to it again and again. But the landscape, I find that the image starts to kind of have a life of its own in my mind's eye, so that I can start to paint from memory. And that is an incredible thing that has happened to me over time, that I've started to be able to go back in my mind's eye to re-experience a place visually. I find that I can't do it if I don't have the paintings in front of me. But if I have the paintings in front of me, even if they're just, kind of very cursory sketches, I can bring my mind back to the visual experience. And so I can begin to paint from memory and paintings at the same time. And that's something that's only happened recently, I would say.
You mentioned it was kind of like your muscle memory, your visual muscle memory.
I could not do that as a young person.
Which I think is really interesting. And I think it's become more attuned. And perhaps this idea of the fleeting nature of some of the scenes that you've tried to capture in Maine has helped accelerate that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about your process. How does your prep work or your creative process differ when you're doing a landscape to the still life work?
Ask me that one more time.
How does your preparation or process differ, if at all, from when you're doing still life versus doing your landscapes? I'm sorry, we don't have any landscape paintings, but
I know. There is a little one on the wall here behind, but
well,
I know I'm tiny. And please go to the Art Now Media website. It's gorgeous, and there are a lot of seascapes on there. So I encourage everyone to look at the Art Now Media under Christine Lafuente. And we did a show last spring called Sailing into Summer. So there are a lot of Maine paintings on that website. And well, the logistics, right? So when I'm painting still life in the studio, I have all the stuff set up around me like Command Central, right? I've got, the carts and the easel and the garbage can and, the cans of brushes and, the coffee pot and the radio. And, I've just got, it really is like Command Central. Sometimes I end up like barricading myself in. So, and it's very comfortable, right? I've made it very comfortable. It's hard, but it's comfortable, especially once I'm in a rhythm of working that way. Landscape painting is like, I have to drag all my stuff out there and wander around. And anybody who's painted with me, there are a couple of people here who've painted with me, know I'm a mess. I usually have to like build up this like head of steam and anxiety procrastination. And then eventually I'll just, start dragging all the stuff out. So it's a very different process, actually, to make myself portable. It's a very different process. And I'm not as intrepid as I used to be. I used to be able to, drag my stuff almost anywhere. Now I like if I can just kind of be semi-contained and not have to take it too far, but setting up outside is a challenge. It's you're dealing with bugs, light, wind, and things like that. So
thank you. Can we speak about mediums for a moment?
Sure.
How do you think your compositions and work differ depending on whether you work in oils, watercolors, or drawings?
Well, and this is kind of a foreshadowing of things to come on Art Now Media, because I'm excited that I'm going to start putting some of my works on paper up here.
We're very excited about that.
Yeah, we're very excited about it. Sometimes painting in oil can feel so like you're cooking for a lot of people. Like it's just there's so much mess involved that having a way to work more directly is like a relief, right? So working in pencil, I find that I'm looking for a completely different set of relationships than when I'm working in color. Usually when I'm working in pencil, I'm trying to look at how gestures move through space, and I'm looking at tone. When I'm working in watercolor, I mean, I that's something that I come back to, but I always feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And then it becomes very much just about putting color next to color. It's very loose. The watercolor is very loose, and it's a very different way of working because I actually have to restrain myself with the watercolor to not overwork it. With oil, it has a kind of forgiveness of working wet into wet, but with watercolor, it requires a kind of intention that oil I find is more forgiving.
It's interesting. Thank you. This is something that I've thought about over the years. Can you please also address how your work can differ depending on the size? Some of the smaller works certainly feel a bit more abstract and inferred than the larger works.
So, I'm going to go back to this larger painting because, so this is 16 by 20 inches, and the larger paintings often they appear to be more kind of representational than the smaller works. The smaller works appear to be more abstract, but I think that that is just the brush stroke in the proportion of the brush stroke to the scale of the canvas is such that it looks more abstract on a small canvas because the marks are so much bigger compared to the scale of the surface. Whereas in a large format, like there are some very broad areas here that they're pretty abstract, but because the brush strokes are, the marks are in proportion smaller to the scale of the canvas, it reads in a more rendered, realistic way.
Do you change brushes between them, or are you using the same brushes?
I have I vary brushes. I usually end up with like at least 10 dirty brushes.
Okay. But do you think between a larger painting and a smaller painting,
the
scale might affect brushes you select?
Although I'm guilty of trying to use the biggest brush possible, even on a smaller. I want to answer a question that's in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And it's just about color. So, and the question is about graying down color. So, and it's a painter question, but it's also for me a compositional question, because let's see if I can find a good example. Let's get, so I don't know, I'm going to kind of move around a little bit looking for one that I think I can, this in a way is a good example because there's so much saturation in here. And yet, like in between the flowers, there's this kind of quiet, darker gray brown, right?
Mhm.
So I use, there are a few different things I use to create emphasis in a painting. One is contrast, right? Like how light or dark is a piece of paint, right? So this delphinium kind of stands out against, the darker tones around it, but also around it, some of these tones, there's kind of these dark reds, but there's also these grayed, we'll call them grayed down form or grayed down colors. So there's different ways I do that. One is, not putting white in the color, just letting the color, I might use an earth tone, right? An earth tone is sort of a naturally neutral color, but also I love making different kinds of grays, different kinds of neutrals by taking two very saturated complements and bringing them together. So anyway, I wanted to say that because sometimes it seems like the colors are gray, but they're actually a combination of two very prismatic colors mixed together that kind of start to cancel each other out and quiet down. So that's a fun painter thing, but it ends up being a way to guide the eye around too. Like if you look here, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but
Yeah.
Between this violet and this brown it's almost the same value, right?
Right.
That green, these are almost all the same value. And it's, this is a secondary color, violet, a green, and then an earth color, right? But on the palette, they're so close. There's just a slight variation. So that's a really fun painter thing to do, that moves the eye from a positive form, that this purple flower, to a negative form, a negative space, which is this background color, and then having a little bit of light that kind of interrupts that big mass of dark. And then this blue here is also a very similar tone. So that's just kind of a fun painter thing.
Somebody just asked in the chat, saying you had beautiful work. Look forward to seeing you in Maine. Will there be a recording? Yes, there will be a recording. It will be on Art Now Media early next week. I have a video section on the website. And so if for some reason you can't get to it, if you email me, I will put my email in here. You can email me and I'll send you a link to the recording.
Thank you. I'll also email I'll email this out as well.
So last question, because I think we're running out of time and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. What else would you like to know about your work, like us to know about your work, and where might that be headed? So I know it's a very open-ended, but maybe in a minute or less, give us a sort of an indication.
Well, I'm always very interested in seeing. I'm always very interested in seeing. So sometimes the process of abstraction has to do with trying to see things differently, especially as my eyes change over time. And so I don't know. I mean, the paintings are as much about the things I'm painting as they are about seeing in itself. So I I look forward to continuing to experiment. And I also look forward to, taking on kind of more ambitious scale with the still life, and trying to have them, work in an abstract and representational way. And also, as I'm building my visual memory, there might be other layers. And then the last thing is that I'm going to be going to teach a workshop in Croatia in May. Anybody is welcome to join me. And I'll be teaching in Maine this summer. You're welcome to join me. And so I know the experience of going to Europe and going back to Maine will have an impact. And this winter, okay, here's one last thing. This winter, I was able to paint and travel in the US Virgin Islands, and the sunrises in the tropics overlooking the ocean and the Caribbean just gave me this idea about what it's like to paint that far distance between the sea and the sky, where you can barely tell where, what is solid and what is air. I love that. I love things that become visible, invisible, you're not really sure, and then trying to find a way to mix it and put it down.
That's really, I love the idea of the Virgin Islands and the sun. I think that actually, when you think about the sun coming up, you think about flowers blooming. And I think that that is actually a good segue into, maybe we could take the screen down so we could see you and me, and we could now take a few questions just from anybody who might have anything that they wanted to ask about.
A comment and a question.
Wait, please put it in the chat. Please put it in the chat. We're not going to.
I'm sorry.
There's a question in the chat from a painter about developing that muscle memory. And so I look forward to developing that as well. That is a real thing. I do believe that's a real thing.
Yes.
And it becomes layered, like we have a muscle memory and then we go back to the subject and we kind of bring our memory with us. We bring that with us when we go back to it.
Just looking to see if there were any other.
Throw that question in the chat. I'd love to.
Yes, please put it. Yeah, just once everybody starts talking, we'll have a cacophony. So any else, because we're sort of getting to the top of the next. I leave a little time for anybody to ask any other questions. No? Okay. Well, this is amazing. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate your time and interest. And I will be putting on Art Now Media a copy of this, as well as on my YouTube channel, Art Now Media. They're both going to be the same thing, but sometimes people, like that as opposed to the website. So I mention it here. And Christine, again, thank you so much. We will be having an exhibition of, and I'm very excited to say, of some water. So stay tuned. And thank you so much for coming. And I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to see
Bye.
people.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.